Hello, everyone. Welcome to Life Edge, because life doesn't have to be mediocre. I am joined today by our co-host and friend, Dr. Susan Nash. Hey, Susan, how are you?
Great. I'm really thrilled to be here
Oh, that's
and
great.
super thrilled that we have a fantastic guest.
We do, and we'll get to him in 1 second. Here we go. We are back. Susan, would you like to do the honors?
Yes, absolutely. As you might know, I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it's very close to, and probably the same place as the Osage Nation and the Osage Nation that used to be in Kansas and Missouri and Oklahoma and extending, I think, all the way to Arkansas. And right now, we still have the Osage Nation. It's intact now as a sovereign nation, and it's headed by tribal leadership, headed by Chief Geoffrey Standing Bear. And we're just really thrilled to have the opportunity to have Chief Standing Bear here and to learn a little bit about what the Osage Nation is doing in terms of cultural heritage and making sure that the nation and the people really do have an impact today and in the future, not just in their own in their heritage, but also in sharing with the rest of the world the importance of what they are. So I'm just thrilled.
And hi, Chief. How are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me on your show.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Now, one of the things, Susan, you have a set of questions you wanted to ask, I know, regarding culture and everything else. Would you like to start with that?
Well, absolutely. And I thought maybe we could start with the history. I think that a lot of our viewers perhaps do not know the history of the Osage Nation. And so perhaps we could start with understanding where the Osages are and where they were historically.
My great uncle, Freddie Lookout, told us the story of our living on the East Coast at one time by the ocean. And that was a long time ago. And there were 60,000 of us at that time. The anthropologists tell us that they have records in the ground and showing us in the Ohio River Valley uh, before Columbus and the crew came here. And in historical times, you will find the maps in a defined area that Susan described, uh, northern Arkansas, western um, Missouri, parts of, well, actually up to St. Louis, and then over to eastern Kansas and eastern Oklahoma. And we linguistically are related to the Siouan tribes. And closely related to the Osage are the Omaha, Ponca, Quapaw, and Kaw uh, tribes. And the Siouan tribes go further north into the Dakotas and into Minnesota. So that is our background as far as a general background. The Osage itself was identified, and we were eventually removed to Oklahoma here on the about 60 miles northwest of Tulsa, Oklahoma is our headquarters. Our neighbors to the east are the Cherokee Nation, to our south, the Muskogee Creek Nation, and across the river, Arkansas River, here west is the Ponca and the Pawnee, Oto, Kaw, and some other tribes. So that's our general location. We are 19,000 strong, although a majority of our people have left this area over the decades in search of work. And we have a lot of Osages living in California, Texas, Kansas, and other areas of the country.
Would you say that's something that's happening in a lot of the tribes and nations, that they are slowly migrating out of the reservations, mixing in, like you said, for work and other things? Is that something pretty common right now?
Yes, it is, and what is more common, unfortunately, is the loss of our language. I have just been on a tour to the west, the far west, not as far as you are, but into New Mexico and Colorado, Arizona, and they are experiencing the same loss of language that we are. And from them, I learned about the immersion schools they have put in place to rescue their languages. And in fact, this week, my legislature is considering the funding proposals and the staff to put together the first Osage immersion school.
How would that work?
We're going to start off small. And let me take the best example that I saw on my recent tour, and that was at the Pueblo of Cochiti, which is in the Rio Grande Valley. They have a small group of students, and when I walked in the door, a lady teacher there told me no English allowed. And we sat and observed, and we were allowed eventually to have some contact as long as we didn't speak English. And the children there were in English-speaking homes, but when they were dropped off at the school, they became only surrounded by their language and their culture. And it is important to understand that the reach out into the home is also part of this process. We're starting with 12 children and dedicated teachers to teach them math, science, technology, everything we can. But one thing that we have learned from all the experts we've talked to is that a human brain and mind learns language best from the time of birth through the 6 years of age. So this first immersion school is going to concentrate on children under 6, and then the next phase will be children older as we expand the 0 to 6 group. So in a few weeks, we're going to start small and start from there. But I really encourage you to go to Coach T and see that model, because that is what I'm following.
You know, it's actually wonderful because people, especially when you look at language not only conveys words, but it conveys the thoughts. And the culture really is built into the language. And a lot of the Indian tribes had a very rich language, and was really quite, I would say, much more descriptive than your typical Western languages. And that's, I think, where the beauty in the languages come from. And just interesting enough, I used to teach English at Berlitz. I lived in Argentina for 3 years, and I taught English there. They took the same approach of really young kids looking at pictures and identifying graphically what the words meant. So they didn't really have to memorize the word, they had to memorize the pattern. And once you understand the patterns, it becomes a lot easier to pick up the words. And even older, it was a little harder when they were older. We were teaching executives. It was definitely harder, but it was amazing how much they picked up by pattern recognition.
So true. We don't want to teach people words. We want to share our culture.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one example an elder gave me is the word for cook in our language is ohon, and it means more than just cook. When they're using that word in a song, they're talking about all the preparation and good feelings that go involved with people working together, because when we eat, we always eat in a communal fashion. And that situation is created where we can share food, we talk to each other and a good fellowship. And that whole concept is embodied in that word. And so when someone of my generation or younger tries to use it for just to cook, we have to be careful that we're using it in a certain plain meaning and not moving over to the ceremonial meaning. And those nuances are being lost, and we have to restore the life of our people that we've carried on for thousands of years, and we're losing that rapidly. And as my relative tells me, this is the last train out. After tens of thousands of years, this is it. We have to do it now, or it'll be lost forever.
That's really great. And it was interesting. I've studied a number of languages, and a couple of them don't exist anymore. One being Anglo-Saxon, and it was required, and it sort of exists now embodied in English, but it's so different in terms of its structure. And the kennings, which are things like two concrete words that are put together. So, like what may seem like a hallway or just friendship, they'd have a whole list of like concrete things that went with it. And Guarani reminded me of that when I was studying Guarani in Paraguay, and it really brings it into the mindset of the people and their way of understanding reality. And I think that it's extremely true that in the case of the Osage, like you said, the last train out, it's sort of worse than having Anglo-Saxon only existing in written form, because at least it's sort of morphed into something. And in this case, I guess there aren't really Osage words or terms that entered into another language. So it's if it goes, it goes. So I think what you're doing is really heroic.
Well, there's a few words that names of towns and rivers.
Oh, yeah.
Place names. What we're looking for is the conversation that people have among themselves to describe themselves, their inner thoughts, their observations, and to share those, and also to carry on our traditions of relationship with the sun and the stars and our environment, and to remember our clan names and how all these things are related to each other and to our families, and which defines us as a separate people. And diversity is good. If you don't have diversity in the world, then it seems like the world would be ending. So we're trying to do our part and maintain the diversity of the human race. And for us, it is tied to our history and to our territory. And we have very little land left, and we're trying to reestablish our presence on what remaining land we do have.
It is really beautiful land. I'm sitting looking out north into the skyscape of Tulsa, and I can imagine that used to be what I'm sitting on is really traditional heritage Osage, and it's an amazing feeling. And I was wondering, I often wonder how the Osages lived, say, 200 years ago.
Well, 200 years ago, we lived in villages that were structured in a clan system. We interfaced with the French quite a bit and adopted a lot of French customs. The real change for us came in the 1800s with smallpox and other diseases, which reduced our populations down to about 10% of its generations, two generations previous. Then when we came to Oklahoma, we thought this was going to be a safe refuge, and they struck oil. And
Yes.
that was good and bad in that the invasion of people who were interested in money occurred very quickly, and we had a lot of problems, but there's been a lot of benefits to it as well. Now that oil field is just a fraction of what it was, but there is still some production. But the oil was big enough to establish Phillips Petroleum Company, Continental Oil. My grandmother actually was the translator for her father. He was chief of the Osage, and she translated with Frank Phillips and others. In fact, I think you have showed.
I love the photograph.
Well, there it is.
Yes.
That's
Thank
my
you for sending it.
That's my father in the baby board.
Oh, okay.
It's Frank Phillips holding him, and to my dad and Mr. Phillips's left, that would be to my right, is my great grandfather Fred Lookout. He was chief of the Osage, and behind Mr. Phillips is my grandmother and my grandfather, my father's parents, and then I know who the others are as well. So that was 1930 when that photograph was taken.
That's amazing. I love that photograph. When you sent it, I opened it up and I was in shock. It's so filled with history.
Yeah, as you can see that they're dressed in traditional clothes, and that's how we were. The oil certainly impacted us in two ways. It allowed us to maintain a culture and get educated for those that were strong enough to do that, but it also impacted us in a negative way, and it brought predators amongst us, and also alcohol and other activities, which including 5% or more of our population during the 20s and 30s was assassinated.
Good grief! How were they? So I'd read a little bit about it, but were they just absolutely just murdered for their interest in the resources?
Yeah, and in fact, we are told it was the FBI's first criminal case here involving such types of crimes, and the typical situation would be a non-Osage would marry into the family, and then would assassinate the siblings, and then the court system and the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs and law enforcement would all make sure that those interest and ownership of the minerals would transfer to the surviving sibling. And at the end of the day, when the sibling had accumulated all of her, usually it's a woman, but sometimes a man's relatives' interest, then they would assassinate the remaining, and the non-Indian would inherit. And the leading case that broke the chain involved Mr. Hale over there in our Fairfax community. They blew up a house one time in order to get a whole bunch of them at once. It's called the Osage Reign of Terror, and one of the terrible side effects is that a large part of the generation of my father were sent to boarding schools and military schools for safety, where they did not practice their culture and their language. Mm-hmm. They came back when they were in their teens, and but that's a historical fact.
It's sort of funny if you really think about it. Our quote unquote whatever culture we have right now, I'm not even sure what culture we have anymore in this country, but it has spread all over the world. Kind of the culturalist culture, if you want to call it that, kind of vacuous, empty, not devoid of spirit, if you will. It's just, I look at it as just atrocious what's going on in every respect, not only to what's happened to the Indians throughout the years, but almost every culture around the world. We've become, I guess I call it materialized.
I don't know how old you are, but
I'm old. I'm 61.
okay, well, I'm 62, and when I was in my teens, wherever I went in different parts of the country, you could tell where you were from the smell
Yes.
of the foods and people, and every place kind of smells the same now, and it just seems all that diversity, even in cities, is going away. One of the great pleasures we have here during our ceremonial periods is the smell of our traditional food, and not to mention the taste. And that there's nothing like it. And you go from tribe to tribe
Yeah.
and enjoy the different traditional foods of that particular tribe. And all Native people love to visit other tribes, and we are always taken in well and treated well by the other tribes, and a lot of good feelings and prayer and fellowship continues to this day. But food is an important element in our existence.
Yeah, I remember here in the Thousand Oaks area, which is just a little bit south of us, they used, I don't know if they're still doing it, I haven't seen any ads for it, but they used to do the meeting of the tribes. And there were probably 6 or 7 tribes that would meet there, and the dances were beautiful. The food was great, the breads, everything was just really, it was very enjoyable. And it was also very pleasant to watch the younger tribespeople still able to do the dances, still able to move, to have that if you want to call it, some of them were warrior dances, some of them weren't, but it was just absolutely wonderful to watch. And I know in my particular case, I've been a martial artist my whole life, so I spent a lot of time doing martial arts throughout different parts of the world and learning different styles and systems. I always found it fascinating because the spirit's really what's behind it. And you're right, those gatherings are just wonderful.
In order to dance like that, we just finished 21 dances in June, and it's hot in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Yes.
You have to be pretty healthy.
Yes.
And that is the other big issue here, and in every reservation, is health.
Yeah.
We have changed our diets in the last 100 years, and from what we had eaten for thousands of years. And as you know, diabetes and alcoholism are problems on all reservations, and those are sugar-based ailments.
Yeah.
And it's because our metabolisms have been blown up. So what we need to be doing is getting away from government food, corporate food, and get back into our healthy eating and drinking of water, clean, good water, to maintain good health, because you can't function when you're sick.
Yeah.
So part of our education initiative is not only the immersion, but to make sure that these children are getting the best of health care. And we have limited resources. We have some small casinos, nothing like what you have in California. We're using that money because we're not bound by some federal program guideline. We can put it where it's needed. So those tribes that do have some gaming are very fortunate, but a lot of tribes don't have gaming.
Okay.
That's so true. And I think that it's, again, a really wonderful approach to start young. And I was looking through a lot of different websites and a lot of different news items, and I was very impressed with the Osage, their programs for the young and also for the elders. And I was wondering if you could describe some of the programs that you have for youth as well as the elders.
Well, for the youth, I described the immersion, but we also have the programs of powwows, and children can learn their culture from their relatives that live here, but we are not able to reach the majority of our people who have moved off the reservation, and that is a challenge. As far as our elders, we don't do hardly anything except have our food programs, and then we have a new Medicare supplement program that covers all their Medicare co-pays and deductibles. Yes, that helps. And then every Osage over 65 gets a $1,000 a year card that they can use for anything that insurance doesn't cover. The rest of our people get a $500 a year card that they can use. So we do little things here and there, but I can tell you we don't do near enough, and we don't do near enough for our veterans. When these young men and women come back from combat, we don't do enough to readjust them to the world. And then, in fact, I had right here earlier, Jason, my chief of staff, and I were talking about how we need to do more in real terms, and then we turn around and honor our veterans, like this medal here represents our code talkers that during World War I,
yes.
our people translated for the U.S. Armed Forces like other tribes did. These codes could not be broken because they were in our native languages, and the other side couldn't understand it. So the federal government recognized giving these tribes and code talkers these medallions. The original that we have in possession is about twice as big as this. This is a replica, but here we are honoring them, and we do honor when we have our powwows and all that, but we need to do a lot more. And it's a matter of limited funds and priorities. We only get $40 million to spend on all these health from our gaming, all our health, children, veterans, elders, new buildings, anything. Is our profits are $40 million that we spend from our casinos. Now, we're fortunate to have that, and I know that some of the tribes near big populations make a lot of money, but there are tribes here in Oklahoma that make just a fraction of that. So we got to take these limited funds and put them in different places, and I've decided under my administration, it's going to be the children first. And I wish it could cover everybody, but we can't. We're going to take care of these children first, and we're going to support those families that have those children. And then do what we can for elders and veterans, but we don't have enough money.
No, and when you say $40 million, a lot of people might say, well, that's a lot of money. It isn't. It goes very fast.
Not if you spend it among thousands of people.
That's right. And even the 40 million today is 400,000 50 years ago. It's not that much.
Well, we get 19 million from our federal grants, because we really try to get federal grants, but those are very restrictive on how we use that. But $15 million of our money from that 40 million goes right out to that health benefit, and the other is we make sure every Osage who wants to get a higher education gets up to $8,750 per year. All they got to do is make a C average. Now
That's great.
That costs us $8 million a year. $8 million. Okay, and our health card costs us about $6 or $7 million. It fluctuates. We have a burial assistance program, which is a lot of money. If you pass away, no matter where you live, we'll give $5,000 to help you with your funeral expenses. So when you take all those kind of things that helps anybody anywhere, then you turn to your people right here where we are. Or 40 million is just not enough. And plus, we're trying to buy land back, and we're going to do it. We're going to survive. It's just how are we going to get there?
Now,
Well, I think that, I think investing in the education, especially starting young and then going through college, is fantastic, because you'll have a certain number of people who will really want to dedicate themselves in really entrepreneurial and unusual ways to build and start new things too.
It's really good that people who have left and are taking advantage of these programs feel connected And so the generation that has been 2 generations removed from our homeland, they feel connected, and now we're hearing back from them. So now we're trying to buy the land and we provide police protection, we're trying to provide housing, and we've got to rebuild our communities. And then I'll tell you, Susan, you're going to be the first person to see this outside of Jason and 2 of my staff people.
Thank you.
I want to get this economy going. I don't know what the U.S. Department of Treasury is going to want to say about this, but these are coins, and I got a dollar, nickel, quarter, penny, $50. We've got to find a way for our small businesses here to accept these as our currency. And I want to be able to have people who don't believe in them to come in and say, we don't believe in that money, you come over here and we'll cash it in for you. But the only way we can get ourselves back as a nation is we have to act like a nation. And
I like that.
I believe a currency is important so we can start our economy again. And I hope other tribes will do this as well. But again, I understand that the federal government may not appreciate that. So we'll make sure that we check, make sure it's legal. But that's the kind of thinking we do to say, how can we maintain ourselves in our own territory and be good neighbors to everyone that's not Osage, and to maintain our culture, our language, and continue our history, be healthy, and have a good economy and a good education. You know, these are goals that people all over the world have, and we're trying to do that in our corner of this planet.
You know, it's fascinating what you're saying, too, because it is like the same idea of Bitcoin, which is now becoming more and more popular, partly because most of our currency isn't worth anything anymore. It's just credit. If you could get all of the tribes to adopt something like that idea, which would be like a Bitcoin idea, all of a sudden it would have a lot more weight. And it's amazing what governments can and can't do. They can sort of stop counterfeiting, but they can't stop really the creation of a new coin if it's valid. They can't stop Bitcoin. They've tried. It hasn't worked. So it's just sort of an interesting thing. And if you think about it, it kind of brings it back to the gold standard we used to be on.
We use blankets now as a currency of sorts. I mean, blankets are a good symbol for sharing and keeping someone warm. But they also are exchanged as something of value. And we've been doing that like we did with buffalo robes and horses and so forth. It just seems to me that with our merchants locally here, our people and the merchants could try to make this work. If not, then we're just going to be like a city or town, some local subdivision, and we should probably stop talking about being a nation if we're not going to act like a nation.
Well, you can also do offshore banking eventually.
That's risky.
Oh, well, I won't go into it.
Yeah. I think you run into money laundering on that one.
No, we looked at that, and some other tribes did, and there are limits to the sovereignty of the nations. That's for sure. When it comes to offshore banking within the boundaries of the United States of America, that has not happened for good reason, because the federal government and the state governments are very protective of the banking system. And I'm not going to get into all the reasons why. It's just there. Well, I can talk about that some other day.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's sort of interesting.
Sorry, I had that random thought.
Yeah, and a lot of people, for example, they think of the Secret Service in the U.S. as there to protect the president. No. Their actual main responsibility is to protect the Treasury, to protect the federal Treasury. That's really or the Federal Reserve. I mean, that's really their job. Everything else is incidental.
we're not here to fight the United States of
No.
America. We're here to survive as a separate people. But there are some things we believe we can do to further that goal and still be compatible with our relationship with the United States. But some things you just got to be careful with. For example, in my previous life as an attorney, I filed in 1984 a case in Oklahoma asking the federal courts to recognize Indian gaming for the first time. Now, why Indian gaming and not gun running or some other controversial activity? Well, it turned out that gaming, if properly regulated, was an acceptable standard from the law's point of view. There were moral objections at the time, and still are, but you don't want to fall over into areas that would discredit other activities. So you have to be very careful what new activities you have to go into, because if you are doing something new, even if it is legal, if your people are going to benefit and the state or the feds are not, then you're going to get some blowback. And that's what happened. In 1988, the United States Congress passed the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, which restricted our gaming rights that we had won in courts in previous years. And now Oklahoma, like other states do, gets a piece of our gaming revenue. And it's all a power game. So, but we said when you're as small as we are, and if you survived what we've gone through, you learn to be careful. But you also learn to stand up and for your rights.
That is so cool that you were part of the first initiative. I'm very impressed about that, and that took a lot of courage.
Well, I had good leaders behind me. I was a young lawyer, and I was gung ho, and I had some great leaders behind me. The chief of the Muskogee Creek at that time, his grandfather was a Supreme Court justice, and when the federal government said the Creek Nation courts were abolished in 1901, and so was their legislature, they met in secret into the 1920s, and he always told me that if you want to act like a nation, you just have to do it. And when he found out, and I found out, the Seminoles in Florida and the Cabazon in California were taking the lead, my job was to study how they were doing it. But the big risk was to my clients. The Tulsa County District Attorney's Office, in conjunction with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, declared it illegal, and my clients were threatened with jail, and they were willing to go to jail for what they believed was right. And I was just a young attorney, very fortunate to have such clients.
Wow. That's really fascinating.
Chief, we call this show Life Edge, and the reason we call it that is, what are the things in life that have given you an edge? In other words, what edge did you get out of some of your experiences growing up? And you've given some examples just now of, for example, your career as a youthful attorney. What edge? Yeah, what edge do you think you've had that? And obviously, we can tell just by what you're saying, have helped not only you but are helping the tribe.
Perseverance. Never give up. Never understand. Never think that you know too much. We are taught as children that the whole concept of knowledge and God is so large that we are nearly insignificant, and that is taught to us in so many different ways. But we can be blessed by understanding our relationship in the world. And for us here where we are, we use the sun as a guide for orientation, because the sun is a entity which was created before us, they say, before our time, and then that power exists on this planet and inside of us, that heat. So there is a whole, what do you say, order of the world that we as Native peoples are taught, that puts us in a small place, but we are connected with everything. But we must take advantage of every second of this gift of life, and we must go to the end, and because if you don't, it's like what you say, a sin to waste this gift. Now that's what kills us about this disease and this kind of and then violence upon our people, or any person. Disease, messes you up. You can't think straight, and it gets you depressed, and and then before you know it, you're old, and then you're dead. So we go through here one time, unless you believe in reincarnation, and so we're taught to you keep going. Washka is the word. Try hard, and they teach us that. Don't quit. Keep going, and then always remember you turn to that great spirit. You talk to that sun and ask for guidance. And so it's talk like that and teachings like that. All tribes have, which and then you start that way and know that you're really small. Then you turn around and look at your other humans and say, well, we're all the same here. Don't care what your title is. We're just we're small creatures, and now we get into fellowship with each other.
Yeah, it's funny. I keep thinking that we've become arrogant as a society. We've lost the respect for, like you said, the spirit or what's around us. We're just very arrogant, and of course that doesn't last long. You get out of harmony, eventually things go bad.
Let me give you an example. When I was young, they showed us cedar. That cedar, they say, we use cedar and we pray. They say that cedar takes care of the unseen elements of our being, grief, sadness, and those things in our mind that make us this certain way. But they said, that cedar, it doesn't know what you think is right and wrong, because that right and wrong may be different. Like back in 100 years, 1,000 years ago, maybe 1,000 in the future, that those issues of what's right, what's wrong, don't get into that. That cedar's powerful. It's going to carry your prayers and your thoughts to God. And they say what you should do is you pray to that, and that cedar, you tell what you want. You got to say it from your heart. Your heart will speak for you, and all those emotions. And that's what's going to go up. Don't try to put your mind into it and say, well, it's going to be this way, because that's, I guess you'd say, culturally restrictive. Mm-hmm. You go from one country to the next, or one tribe to the other, people got different ways. You got to respect it. But there's some things like that cedar that's it's powerful, and it's got its ways in the universe. But you don't want to put your human thinking in it, because it's just pointless. It's just ridiculous. So they teach us like that.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense. And with that, we are going to wrap up this show. Chief, really appreciate you coming on. I love the stories you tell, and we definitely want you to have a lot of success with what you're doing for the nation, as well as for all the people around you. It's a good cause.
I agree, and I want to thank you too, and thank you too for the final thoughts that you mentioned about cedar. It really is thought provoking, and wow, a lot of the things that you said they're thought provoking, and I want to mull over them. Very valuable.
Yeah, and please thank Jason for us. He's been helpful trying to get this all set up.
Oh yeah, he's the best.
So, Well, again, appreciate you coming on. If you're watching the show, please subscribe to the show and give us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. So till next time, we will see you next week. Thanks a lot, Chief. Thanks, Susan. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chief Standing Bear.